Okay, good evening. Welcome to tonight's Halacha Shir. The Shir is entitled Davening Out Loud. I don't know if you ever thought about that, but you may have been in shul, been irritated by a person davening near you who is davening out loud. Is that okay? Is that acceptable? Is it preferred? What is the halacha regarding davening out loud? If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The connection is in the first box. It's actually a very good connection to this week's Sedra, because when it comes to this week's parsha, you've got 7 of the 10 plagues, and the second makkah is tzfardeya. The pasuk says, "Vayikra Paro leMoshe la'Aaron, vayomer hatir Hashem." After he's been punished with this makkah, Paro is distraught. He calls Moshe and Aaron. He says, "Please entreat Hakadosh Baruch Hu v'yaseh hatzfardim imeni u'me'ami, and just get rid of them. I need to get rid of the frogs." Vayetzi Moshe v'Aaron me'im Paro vayitzak Moshe l'Hashem. And Moshe and Aaron leave Paro, and then they cry out to Hashem. Says the Sifsei Chachomim, Makshim ha'olam, which means the world asks, Lama shina ha'kosuv b'tzfardim. Why does the Torah here change the Lashon and say, Vayitzak Moshe Hashem, or V'shar makas kaziv vayet ha-Moshe Hashem? With all the others, it says that Moshe entreats HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but here with the makas, with the Sfardei, it says Vayitzak, he cries out. Perhaps, says the Sifsei Chachomim, you can answer, Mishum Damrinan, because we know the rule is when it comes to tefillah, HaMispalel tzorech la'ashmiya la'oznov. When you daven, it needs to be a little bit audible that you yourself can hear it. La'ashmiya la'oznov, that your ears can hear your tefillah. Mashem moitzi mipiv, that which comes out of your mouth. V'kan, here with the Makav Tzfadeya, Hoyuhat Tzfardim Tzeakim. The frogs were croaking, they were shouting, it was noise. Rashi says, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu had to raise his voice, in his tefillah to Hashem, so that he could fulfill this davening requirement, that his own ears could hear what he was davening. And therefore, Vayitzak Moshe El Hashem, specifically with the very noisy backdrop of all the tzfardeya, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to raise his voice to fulfill the davening requirement of Lahashmiya La'oznov. So it's a good opportunity to discuss this, davening out loud. What exactly should one do? So the starting point is a Rambam. The Rambam says in Hilchos Tefillah, Perek Hei Halacha Tes, Hashav Yes Hakol, which means the way you control your voice, what level, what volume do you put it on? Keitzad, how should you do it? Says the Rambam, Lo yagbia koile b'tfilasoi, a person should not raise his voice in his tefillah, v'lo yispal b'libay, and similarly, or conversely, a person shouldn't be on mute. He shouldn't daven b'libay, which means to just daven in his heart, just to think the words. Elam mechate chadvarim b'sfasa, which means he should cut them with his mouth. In other words, he should actually mouth the words, umashmiya la'oznov b'lachash. And it should be just like on a very low level, that your own ears can hear what you say. V'lo yashmiya koile, but not to raise your voice, elim kain, unless hayachoyle, and for some reason, if you're unwell, you need to raise your voice a little bit, speak a little bit louder than normal. Or you can't concentrate, you can't have kavana ashi yashmiya koile, and the only way to do that is to sort of raise your voice a little bit to just help your kavana. Then harizem muta. So you're allowed to raise your voice on these situations, or bilvad, with a very important caveat, not unless if you're in public, if you're betzibur, you're davening with a minyan, you're going to disturb other people, then do not raise your voice. That's the Rambam. Now, the Tur, who comes, of course, after the Rambam, he sets out 2 views. And this is the interesting thing about this topic. There are 2 views whether or not you should daven out loud. The first view that the Torah expresses is in the name of the Tosefta. Let's take a look. This is box number 3. Omer of Hamnuna. We know that many halachas of tefillah are sourced from Chana, the famous haftarah we learn on Rosh Hashanah. The pasuk says about Chana, she's medaberes al liba, which means she's sort of speaking from her heart, let's say, raks foseh hanois, which I guess normally is understood to mean just her lips are moving. Now, how do you understand that? Her lips are moving could mean that there's no voice, there's no noise, and just literally the lips are moving without any audibility, or it's just very quiet. Mikan, says the Tur, quoting this Gemara in the Gemara in Brachos, Sfasel noise is understood to mean that she needs to mouth the words, Baruch Ato, but just the mouths should move in that way. V'koyle lo yishma, then it says about Chana that her voice cannot be heard, mikan, shelo yishma koyle b'tfilasei. On mute, literally on mute. My daughter, she just graduated and started working just very recently. So she told us she came back on one day this last week, and she said she's a social worker, and she had to go to the Royal Courts of Justice to whatever it is, part of her work to do something there that all the team was there, but it was the High Courts of Justice. It had to be on Zoom. It was on Teams actually, and she said there were some funny moments, and she said she's never heard this phrase before, but the phrase was, "Your Honor, you're on mute." That was the phrase she heard. So, according to the first view of the tour, you've got to be on mute. Yeah, nothing. You can't hear a thing. V'tanya hamashmiya koiloi. Someone who does raise his voice in tefillah, harizem miktane emuna. He's actually of little faith. Shemara kila Hakadosh Baruch Hu ena shemea tefillah belachash. As if you're making out, you've got to shout that Hakadosh Baruch Hu can't hear you if you speak quietly, and therefore it's a lack of emunah. Furthermore, yeah, absolutely. We'll see more exactly which view of the Rambam it follows exactly. And if you raise your voice in tefillah, you're considered like one of the false prophets, because the false prophets would scream and shout in a loud voice because they're not getting anywhere, particularly with Eliyahu Novi and Har Carmel. That it's got to be so silent, it's got to be so quiet, even your own ears shouldn't hear it. Because the Tosefta says maybe your own ears should hear it. So according to the first view brought by the Torah, that there is zero audibility, literally on mute, nothing. Umiyu, says the Torah continuing, but Gemara Didan, in our Gemara, i.e. in the Talmud Bavli, where this Tosefta does not appear, all it excludes is raising your voice, the mashma shemashmiya kol lacherim, i.e. that other people can hear what you're saying. Avala oznov yochel hashmiya, but to your own ears, you can and we'll see you should hear. V'hachi issa behedj b'Yerushalmi, and that is also brought in the Yerushalmi. Yochel yemagbiya kol b'tefilosei. Maybe I might have thought the person should raise his voice. Don't raise your voice, but it should be in an undertone. So you've got two views. You've got the Tosefta, which says on mute, nothing, and then you've got the Gemara, the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, plus you've got the Rambam, which says that you should be in a low audible voice, that just your ears can hear it, but not to disturb others. The Torah then concludes and says, V'hadas nusenes, that logic dictates that the second viewpoint, i.e. that your own ears can hear it, is preferred. And because then you can have better kavon if you're saying something rather than just thinking the words almost. And that is indeed the view of the Rambam. So you therefore have two views, and the Torah favors the second view, which means little audibility. It's very, very interesting netziv, and this I heard from Rabbi Rosler, Daniel Rosler. He brings a very interesting netziv. And the netziv distinguishes between a regular environment where it needs to be loud enough for you to hear, and a very noisy environment where, in order for you to hear your own tefillah, you've got to shout, and that you don't need to hear. And he brings a great raya, because Chana, where was she? She was in the Azorah, and in the Beis Hamikdash. Now the Beis Hamikdash is a noisy place. Think of the Kaisel nowadays. I happened to have the privilege to be there a couple of weeks ago, Shabbos Chanukah. And I was there for Nets on Shabbos morning. I went with my wife. It was very beautiful. So Nets was, let's say, I think at 6:40, 6:45, something like that. So the only time it gets quiet there is at that point at Vasikin, because normally there's so many minyanim, it's so busy. There's a lot happening. And then at 6:43, everyone gets to Shemona Esrei, and then all the various minyanim, they're suddenly quiet, and it's a very beautiful, it's a very special few minutes until the first Chazor Hashatz begins. It so happened that I went a couple of times. One time I went there, just now, a few weeks ago. It was like a Sephardi minyan that sort of misjudged their timing a little bit. Maybe they had a different time for Nets. So, they were sort of holding by Shema when everyone else was just starting Shemona Esrei, and they got a lot of shush, and the guy who was done for the Yom, he made it even louder, So you know what it's like. So for 2 minutes there was a lot of fun and games, and then it went totally quiet for a little bit. Anyway, so the point is that Chana was in the Azora, which is a very noisy environment, and therefore she had to daven, but because of the background noise, it seemed that Raks Faseh noise, that just her lips were moving. But had it been a regular place, then Eli would have heard. So Eli thought that there was no voice coming out, but actually she was speaking, but it just couldn't be heard because of the background noise. Okay, now what is the halacha l'maisa? If you turn over the sheet, the Shulchan Aruch says in Hilchos Tefillin Kuf Aleph Sif Beis, Lo yispal b'liba levad. A person should not daven by heart. You can't just think the words. You've got to cut them with your mouth, as if mouth the words. Just say it like that, so your mouths can move it in that direction, in that fashion. Audible enough that your own ears can hear it. But don't let your voice project so that others can hear it. And then the same things what the Torah said, that if you can't concentrate, then mutlak bi'akoylei. That's only when you're on your own. If you're in davening with a minion, then you can't raise your voice to osi l'mitzvah b'tzibur, because then you're going to disturb, you're going to bother other people. And then the Ramah adds an interesting point. If you want to raise your voice, if you're davening at home, that your children should learn from you, that is allowed. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the second view in the Torah, that a person should daven with a little bit of volume, a little bit of audibility, that you can hear it, but others not. Now the Mishnah Berurah just clarifies and says, you should daven so quietly, that even your neighbor who's standing next to you, that your friend can't hear you. Then you can do things which help you have kavanah, whether that's shockling or raising the volume a little bit, but with the important caveat that but you shouldn't disturb other people. And then he says, even in Pesukei de Zimra, you want to raise the volume a little bit, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears you even if you're doing it quietly. Not like those people who raise their voice too loud. If on Shabbos you want to sing Pesukei de Zimra, one person does that out loud, then that would be okay. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan says something very interesting. Let's take a look at the last box. You see people do things b'kol ram, whether it's certain piyutim and slichas or whatever it is. Ein kpeda. That's not a problem. What about all of the above? V'dafka b'tfilah shmona esra yesh kpeda. All of the above is specifically referring to Shemona Esra. You're standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it's not appropriate to have the volume up. There's no problem. On the contrary, on the contrary, it's better, quoting a famous Ramban at the end of next week's Sedra in Parshas Boy, for Kavonas Romas HaKolos B'Tfilas, etc. Okay, so what emerges from all of our discussion? What emerges is that we came onto this because in this week's Parsha you have the Makkas, and you have the Makkah of Sfadeya, and the Pasuk says with Sfadeya, not Vayet HaMosh Shel Hashem, but Vayitzak. Why? It says of Sifsei Chachomim, because there's such a big background noise, Moshe had to put the volume up so that he could fulfill the requirements of Lashmiya La'ozno, that he could hear his own tefillah, and therefore he had to raise his voice. There are two views presented by the Torah. The first view is known as the view of the Tosefta, where you literally have to be on mute, total silence. However, the Yushalmi, the Bavli, the Rambam, and others in the Shulchan Aruch paskin that you should daven a little bit loud with a bit of volume that you can hear but not others can hear. And there is a machlokes between the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Berurah, who makes no distinction, and whether or not this applies to Shemona Esra only or to the rest of Tefillah. And it seems to be that the Minhag Olam seems to be like the Aruch HaShulchan is saying, that it's quiet for Shemona Esra, but for other parts of Tefillah you do hear people daven. According to the Mishnah Berurah, I guess, so long as you're not disturbing other people, according to the Aruch HaShulchan, that would be in order. The Mishnah Berurah seems to make no distinction, and therefore it's referring to all tefillah, and it should be minimally audible so that you can hear it, but not other people. But like I say, I think the Minhag Olam seems to be like the Aruch HaShulchan, that this only refers specifically to Shemona Esra.